For 11 months, I pretended I didn't know my own name. Not because I'd forgotten it, not because the dementia had taken it from me the way my daughter-in-law whispered to her friends it had, but because the moment my neurologist told me the early-stage diagnosis was far more manageable than anyone realized, I made a decision that surprised even me. I would say nothing. I would let them believe what they already wanted to believe, and I would watch. My name is Lorene. I am 68 years old. I live in a 2-story Craftsman on Maple Creek Road outside of Asheville, North Carolina, the same house where I raised my son, where I planted the garden my late husband Boyd called his Sunday therapy, where I still make biscuits from scratch every Saturday morning because some things outlast grief. The diagnosis came on a Wednesday in October. Mild cognitive impairment, the neurologist said. Early indicators but not a certainty. We'll monitor, we'll adjust. With the right support, you could live another 20 years without significant decline. He said it gently, the way doctors do when they're trying not to give you too much hope. I drove home alone. I made tea. I sat on the back porch and watched the last of the season's hummingbirds hovering near the feeder Boyd had hung from the eave the summer before he died. And I thought about my son. My son Garrett had called twice the week before asking about the house, not asking how I was, asking about the house, whether I'd had it appraised recently, whether I'd considered a trust, whether I knew what property values in Buncombe County were doing. I'd answered each question patiently because that's what I do. But I'd also noticed the shift in his voice, the efficiency of it. The way he moved from greeting to business, the way you clear a table before setting it for the next meal. Garrett is 41. He works in commercial real estate in Charlotte. He married a woman named Bev 2 years ago, and while I have tried to find the things to love about her, what I have mostly found is the way she looks at my dining room furniture like she's already measuring it for a moving truck. The afternoon I came home from the neurologist, I called the one person I trust completely in this world. My neighbor Inez. She has lived 4 houses down from me for 23 years. She brought me soup when Boyd died. She drove me to my colonoscopy and made exactly 1 joke about it on the way home, which is the correct number of jokes to make. She is 72 and sharper than anyone I have ever met. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I told her I wasn't sure yet, but something in me had already started forming a shape, a plan that felt reckless and also completely right. I would not correct their assumptions. I would let Garrett and Bev believe what they were already halfway to believing, that I was slipping, that I needed managing, that the house and the accounts and the land trust Boyd left behind required their guidance. "You want to know what they say when they think no one is listening," Inez said. I did. I wanted to know who my son was when he didn't have to perform for me. There is something particular about being a woman of a certain age and a certain condition, real or perceived, that makes you invisible in the most useful way. People stop editing themselves around you. They stop being careful. You become furniture. Present but not listening. There but not counting. I had lived 68 years being underestimated by one kind of person or another, and for once I intended to use it. I told Inez what I needed from her. She agreed without hesitation. "Just don't do anything I'd have to bail you out for," she said, and I told her I couldn't make promises. The first time Garrett came after the diagnosis, he brought Bev and a yellow legal pad. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he spoke slowly, the way you speak to someone who might not follow along. He explained that he'd been doing some research, that there were options for people in my situation, that a revocable living trust would streamline things considerably, that the house, given its location and the growth of the Asheville market, was an asset we should think about proactively. I nodded. I asked him to repeat a few things I had heard perfectly the first time. I let my eyes drift to the window once or twice. Not too much. Just enough. Bev took notes on the legal pad. Before they left, Garrett squeezed my shoulder and said, "We just want to take care of you, Mom." And I believe he believed that. That's what made it harder. After they pulled out of the driveway, I called my attorney. His name is Warren, and he has handled my family's affairs for 16 years. I told him I needed to begin a private and thorough review of all accounts, all assets, and anything connected to Garrett's name or Bev's name or any entity they might be associated with. Warren has known me long enough to understand that when I use the word thorough, I mean it. He said he'd start pulling records by the end of the week. I also called my financial advisor, a woman named Portia, whom I had chosen specifically because she has no patience for nonsense. I told her to flag any requests for account access, change of beneficiary forms, or inquiries originating from anyone other than me. She asked if there was something I should tell her. I said not yet. The weeks that followed were instructive. Garrett began calling more frequently. The calls had a pattern. A few minutes of, "How are you? How's the garden? Did you sleep okay?" And then a pivot. "Have you thought more about the trust? Have you looked at the information I sent about the assisted living communities in Henderson County? Have you considered that the upkeep on a house this size might be more than you need to manage alone?" That last one stung. Boyd and I had chosen this house together. We had sanded these floors on our hands and knees the first winter we owned it. Our daughter, our sweet girl Lena, who died at 34 from the cancer that came fast and left nothing behind, had taken her first steps in the front hallway. This house was not a burden I needed relieved of. It was the thing I was standing on. But I didn't say any of that. I said, "You may be right. Let me think on it." And I listened. The call I remember most clearly came on a Tuesday evening in November. I had stepped out to water the porch planters, leaving my phone on the kitchen counter with the volume low. When I came back in, I heard Garrett's voice through the speaker. He must have called while I was outside and the call had connected to the house phone by accident, or he'd forgotten which line he'd dialed. I stood still in the doorway. He was talking to Bev. "She agreed to think about the trust," he said. "That's progress. Once that's in place, we can move the investment accounts under the same umbrella. It's cleaner." A pause. "What about the Raleigh property?" Bev asked. "That's the land parcel Boyd bought in 2008. It's worth significantly more than she knows. She hasn't looked at the appraisals in years. If we get conservatorship before she fully understands what it's worth, that becomes part of the estate we're managing." Another pause. "Does she have any idea?" Bev asked. "Honestly, no. The doctors think she could stabilize, but the window is now, once she gets a second opinion and realizes she's more functional than anyone told her. Then we lose the window." "Exactly." I set down the watering can very carefully. My hands were steady. I wasn't surprised, not entirely. But there is a difference between suspecting something and hearing it confirmed in your son's own voice, in your own kitchen, on a Tuesday evening in November when the porch planters still needed watering. I finished watering the planters. Then I called Warren. The land parcel in Raleigh had been appraised 18 months ago at 4 times what Boyd had paid for it. I had not known this because the appraisal had been quietly commissioned and quietly received by Garrett, who had access to the post office box where some of Boyd's estate correspondence was still routed. He had intercepted it. Warren confirmed this. He had also found 2 inquiries to our brokerage house that originated from an email address I did not recognize, which upon further examination was registered to a holding company with Garrett's business partner's name on the incorporation documents. I sat with all of this for 3 days. I did not call Garrett. I did not change my routine. I made biscuits on Saturday. I went to church on Sunday and said hello to the people I've said hello to for 30 years. I walked with Inez on Monday morning and told her what I'd found. She walked quietly beside me for half a block. Then she said, "What do you need?" I told her. She nodded once and said she'd be there. What I did next was invite Garrett and Bev for Thanksgiving. Proper Thanksgiving. The good china. The tablecloth Boyd's mother had hand-embroidered. Sweet potato casserole, the green bean dish from the recipe card I've had since 1987, and a turkey I brined for 2 days the way I always do. Inez would come as well, and Warren, who I told to arrive quietly at 2 o'clock. I spent the week before cooking and preparing and also meeting with Warren to finalize a completely revised estate plan. The Raleigh parcel was removed from any framework Garrett could access. The primary residence was placed in a trust structure to pass to a land conservation organization upon my death, with a life estate that allowed me to remain in it indefinitely. My investment accounts were redistributed, the beneficiary designations updated. And I added a provision for Inez. A specific bequest, a meaningful one. For 23 years of soup and honesty, and exactly 1 colonoscopy joke. Some debts are worth writing down. Warren also drafted a letter to the estate attorney who had processed the post office box correspondence, putting them on formal notice. The holding company inquiry was referred to a forensic accountant. There were no criminal charges, not yet. That was still being determined. What I wanted was not revenge. What I wanted was for Garrett to look at me across a table and understand that I had been present all along. Thanksgiving morning was cool and bright. Inez arrived early to help with the rolls, which is really just her excuse to drink coffee at my kitchen table and tell me what's happening in the neighborhood. I was grateful for her presence. She steadied me. Garrett and Bev arrived at noon. He was dressed well. She was carrying a bottle of wine and a store-bought pie, which told me exactly how much effort she'd invested. They moved through the front hall with the comfortable ease of people who believe a place is already partly theirs. I noticed Bev's eyes go to the corner cabinet where Boyd's mother's silver was displayed. They always did. We sat down to eat. The food was good. Conversation moved the way it does when everyone at the table is performing something. Garrett asked about my health, and I said I was managing. He mentioned that he'd been in touch with a specialist in Charlotte who was really excellent with these kinds of cases. I said that sounded very helpful. After the pie, after the coffee, after Bev had excused herself to the powder room, Garrett reached into the bag he'd brought and produced a folder. He set it on the table with the practiced casualness of someone who has rehearsed the gesture. I had some things drawn up, he said. Nothing complicated, just some documents to protect your interests. The trust language, the account transfers. Very standard. He slid the folder toward me. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at him. Garrett, I said in my regular voice. My clear, unhurried, entirely present voice. I know about the Raleigh appraisal. He went very still. I know about the holding company. I know about the brokerage inquiries. I know about the conversation you had with Bev on the evening of November the 12th when you forgot which line you dialed. The color left his face in stages. He looked younger suddenly. He looked like the boy who had once, at 14, broken the kitchen window with a baseball and spent 3 days trying to figure out how to tell me. Ma. I've been listening, I said. All of it. Every call, every visit. I let you believe what you wanted to because I needed to know how far you'd go. And now I know. Bev appeared in the doorway. She read the room instantly and did not come closer. The front door opened. Warren stepped in, briefcase in hand, and nodded at me. Inez remained at the kitchen doorway, arms folded, bearing witness. I've revised my estate plan, I said. Entirely. Nothing in it resembles what you'd hoped. The house is in a conservation trust. The Raleigh parcel is secured. Your name does not appear in any controlling capacity anywhere in my affairs. Garrett's jaw worked. He looked at the folder between us untouched. I was trying to protect you, he said. The diagnosis was never what you told yourself it was, I said. And you knew that. You said yourself the window would close when I got a second opinion. You weren't protecting me. You were moving quickly before I could protect myself. He didn't answer. There wasn't an answer to give. I reached across the table and pulled the folder to my side. I'm not removing you from my life, I said, and my voice was steady because I meant it. You're my son. You're the last of what Boyd and I built together. But I am removing you from my finances. From every account, every asset, every conversation about what I own and what happens to it when I'm gone. We can rebuild from there if you want to, but that is the only offer I'm making. Bev touched Garrett's arm. He stood slowly. He looked around the dining room, at the table his grandmother's tablecloth covered, at the corner cabinet, at me. He didn't say he was sorry. Maybe he wasn't, not yet. Maybe sorry takes longer than a Thursday in November to arrive. They collected their coats. Bev took the store-bought pie. Garrett paused at the door and said, quietly, I didn't think you were paying attention. I know, I said. That was your first mistake. The door closed behind them. Not a slam, quieter than that. The kind of close that doesn't have any certainty in it. Inez came and stood beside me. We looked at the table, at the good china and the embroidered cloth and what was left of a meal I'd spent 2 days making. You all right? She said. I told her I was. And I was. Not untouched, not without grief. But standing. Still standing in my own house, on my own floors, in possession of every room. In January, I got the second opinion the specialist in Asheville had recommended. The updated assessment was encouraging. With consistent sleep, low stress, and the small daily practices I'd already built into my routine, progression was unlikely in the near term. The neurologist said I was, in his careful phrasing, doing quite well. I did not tell Garrett. Spring came the way it always does in the mountains, in pieces. A warm week, then a cold snap. Then one morning you walk out to find the red buds have opened overnight and the whole ridge is pink. I planted the garden later than usual because my back had required some negotiating, but I planted it. Garrett called in March. He didn't mention the documents or the holding company or any of it. He asked about the garden. He asked if I'd gotten the furnace serviced before winter. He asked, at the very end, if he could come visit sometime. Not to talk about anything. Just to visit. I told him yes. Sometime in April, when the dogwoods were out, we could have coffee on the back porch. There would be no legal pads and no folders and no slow, deliberate enunciation as though I might not follow along. Just coffee. Just the yard Boyd had planted, still growing. That seemed like enough to start with. The dogwoods came early that year. They always do when February is mild. I was out on the porch with my coffee on a Saturday morning, watching the birds, not thinking about much at all, when I heard a car pull up. Garrett came around the side of the house alone, hands in his jacket pockets, looking less put together than I was used to. He'd lost the pressed quality he usually carried. He sat down across from me. I poured him a cup without asking. We didn't talk about money. We talked about Boyd. We talked about Lena, which we almost never do because it still costs something every time. He told me he'd been in therapy since January. He said it without decoration, just offered it up like a plain fact. I said I thought that was a good idea. He said he knew I'd think that. We sat for a while in the quiet that wasn't empty. I don't know what my son is becoming on the other side of what he did. I don't know if what was small and grasping in him will grow smaller or find another shape, but I know that I am still here, in my house, with my garden, with the silver in the corner cabinet and the recipe cards in the kitchen drawer and Inez 4 houses down, who'll be over for dinner on Friday. I know what I have, I know what I protected, and on a clear April morning with the dogwoods out and a cup of coffee going warm in my hands, that is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. There's a particular kind of grief that doesn't have a name for it. The grief of watching someone you raised choose the wrong thing when they thought no one was looking. That's what I carry from all of this. Not anger, not bitterness, something quieter and heavier than either of those. What happened to me What Garrett set in motion didn't begin with greed. I've thought about this long enough now to believe that. It began with the assumption that I was no longer fully present. And once a person decides that about you, everything that follows feels justified to them. The intercept of an appraisal letter, the holding company, the slow, patient pressure toward signatures. Each step made sense inside a story where I was already gone. The cruelty wasn't in the intention, it was in the ease of it. But here's what I've come to understand about my own part in it. The months I spent pretending were not just strategy. They were also a kind of test I was giving myself. Could I hold what I knew without letting it make me into someone smaller? Could I remain, as Boyd used to say, the same woman in every room? That's steadiness, keeping your character intact even when you have every reason to abandon it. That's not something you're born with. It's something you practice, quietly, over decades of ordinary days. I had practiced it without knowing that was what I was doing, and when the moment came, it howled. What saved me was not luck, it was attention. I had paid attention to my finances because Boyd taught me to. I had built a relationship with Warren over 16 years, not because I expected to need him urgently, but because that's what responsible stewardship looks like. I had stayed close to Inez, not as a safety net, but as a friendship. And it turned out friendship is the best safety net there is. The people who tried to take advantage of me were counting on the idea that I had stopped being sharp. What they didn't account for was that sharpness, real sharpness, doesn't announce itself, it waits. I think about the version of this story where I said nothing, signed the documents, let it unfold the way they'd planned. It would have been so easy. I was tired. I was scared. The diagnosis had rattled something loose in me that first week, and I can admit that now. There were days when doing nothing felt like mercy. But there was also this. Boyd worked 40 years for what we built. Lena never got the chance to inherit any of it. I was not going to hand it to carelessness and entitlement without a fight. Not because of pride, because some things are worth the effort of standing up for even when standing up costs you something. Garrett came in April and we sat on the porch and talked about his sister. That conversation cost us both something real. I think that's where the actual rebuilding starts, not with apologies, which can be hollow, but with the willingness to sit in the discomfort of what was lost and not look away from it. I don't know what we'll become to each other on the other side of this, but I know what I kept. The house, the land, the silver in the corner cabinet, my own name, spoken in my own voice, without hesitation. That turned out to be the most important thing I protected,